What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine.com, and doing something a little differently today. The bye week, no football this weekend, and we got hoops in just a few days. We'll be in Coleman Coliseum for the season opener. So, without what better time than to preview the season? We're going to do some team superlatives, joined by Tim Whites and Blake Byler, giving Jimmy a little bit of time off for hoops because I know these two could talk for hours about some basketball. So, what we're going to do is just kind of run down a list of some superlatives that I put together. Thankfully, I sent it to these guys ahead of time, so they're not going to be surprised by anything. But going to kind of start off with the obvious here. Offensive MVP. I was going to send you guys, hey, send me an offensive MVP not named Mark Sears, because that feels like the obvious answer. But I thought, you know what? We don't talk enough about Mark Sears. Mark is a guy that I wrote about it on Monday, and we're calling that exhibition against Memphis. It was a day that ended in Y, and Mark went out and scored 20 points. It's just what the guy does. And I feel like we just kind of take Mark for granted a little bit at this point. So I thought about doing it that way, but I thought, no, we're not doing that. I'm going to give Mark his flowers. You guys can get a little creative if you want, but it feels like this is a slam dunk. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer, and I agree with you. We don't talk about, I mean, we do game recaps and don't even really talk about them. It's almost like the Jordan rules, it's like who's the best player on the team? It's Mark. I mean, every accolade we could give him, phenomenal, big clutch shots, competitive. I mean, look how hard he works. You could see him dragging a little bit or taking some time off during these exhibitions. He's been through so much, but he doesn't. He's out there. He's 100. He's pushing. He's rooting for his teammates, and obviously his shot is one of the most pure college shots I've ever seen in all these years. It's just when he shoots, if he misses, it's more of a story to me than if he makes it.
Is it a slam dunk, Blake, or do you have somebody else that maybe came to mind?
No, it's Sears. Absolutely. There's no question. He's gotten all the preseason recognition that he could get, which I think is very deserved, because there were times last year where I didn't think he was getting the recognition that he deserved, but he's getting that after kind of the March run he had. And just a quick note on Sears, he scores 20, but the most impressive thing to me is how efficiently he does it. He's not shooting 15, 20 shots a game. Most of the time, his field goal attempts are right around like 10 to 12. I think he's a legitimate contender to be a 50, 40, 90 guy this year. I think he was 50, 40, 85 or so last year. So he's efficient enough from the field to get there. If he can get that free throw percentage up a little bit, he'll be right there. And it's just like Tim said, like, you're more surprised when he misses it. And it goes to show how much work he's put in, because he wasn't a great shooter at the start of his career, and now he's got one of the best shots in all of college basketball. So it's the obvious choice, but it's the right choice with Sears as offensive MVP for sure.
Yeah, he and his teammates certainly got some free throw practice in against Memphis. There's no doubt about that. And I don't know about you guys, but like whenever I thought about this, and I thought, no, we're going to give Mark his due, but it was kind of tough to come up with like an alternative. Like once I started to think about it, just because that's not an indictment on Alabama. That's because of the depth that they have.
Yeah, I think if you started like to build the Mark rival, you have to start with like Houston shot, you know what I mean, or LeBaron getting to the basket, or a Mo D. You'd have to start Frankenstein monster in them to compete with Mark. That's how good Mark is, to get all those guys going there. But it's not going to be something. But I agree with the depth. We were just the other day, I made a comment that said Phelan's going to be, a lot of energy coming off the bench, and is he for sure coming off the bench? We don't know. I mean, there's all I know is there's a huge arguments coming, because there's more than 5 quality starters on this team.
Yeah, the starting lineup will be fascinating. And we're going to move on to defensive MVP, because we got a lot to get to. This one also kind of felt like a slam dunk, but I'm going to turn it over to you guys before I share my thoughts, just to see if we're on the same page. Tim, what do you think, or who do you think ends up being Alabama's defensive MVP this season?
It's Cliff, right? I mean, you got to go with Cliff. And it's not just because, I mean, the way he moves, that's the thing about him, like blocking a shot and running the floor, which you love, old school big man type. But he's athletic, he's long, he's rangy, he's going to attack around the rim. He's kind of light. You'd think he could get pushed around, but he doesn't. And obviously, I think you got to give him a little bit of a nod, because it's the one thing that this team didn't have last year. So he's bringing in that missing link as well.
Yeah, we heard from Brian Adams, Alabama's new assistant coach. He was on Hey Coach earlier this week, and he comes from an NBA background, and he didn't hesitate to mention the Joel Embiid factor, just from a defensive standpoint, that presence that Cliff brings, and how nice that is. And yeah, that will be different for sure. Blake, is it as easy as Cliff, or do you have somebody else in mind?
I think Cliff is the MVP or will be the defensive MVP just because of kind of not gravity is the right word, but just the intimidation factor that he has on top of the number of blocks that I think he's going to accumulate over the course of this season. But as a secondary guy, I did think about Darion Reed because I've been incredibly impressed with his defense, both on the perimeter and as a rim protector through these first two exhibition games. He's been kind of tasked with ball handlers a lot, being out on the perimeter. And that's been really impressive to kind of just see the tools he has there. He's really long at 6'8", but also he has a couple insane highlight reel blocks from both of these exhibition games. A lot of times coming over from the weak side with some crazy athleticism. So I think he's going to be one of Alabama's best defensive players. But it's hard not to give MVP to Cliff because he's going to anchor it down low and protect the rim in the same way that Charles Bediako was able to. And the reason that Alabama's defense was able to be as good as it was 2 seasons ago was because of that rim protection factor. It's what they were missing, and it's what they got and are going to get out of Cliff. So he's my answer.
Yeah, I went with Cliff too, but I also wrote down Grant Nelson, and I thought that kind of surprised me a little bit. I look back at the stats last year. My man had 62 blocks. That's the same as Chuck 2 years ago. That's kind of wild to say out loud. And a lot of it was out of necessity because they lost Bediako to the NBA. But Grant stepped up when he needed to. And I think if you add a Cliff in there, Grant could do some good things defensively. I think his steals could go up from what they were a year ago. He's probably not getting it up with 60-plus blocks just because Cliff and some of these other guys are going to take up a lot of those. But I think what Grant did last year defensively is kind of a little underrated. I mean, Alabama wasn't known for its defense last year. I think that was well documented by us and everyone else. But I thought Grant did some nice things. So with that, I don't know if Grant is necessarily a breakout player from a defensive standpoint a year ago. I don't think I'd go that far. But who do you think from this roster is the breakout player for this year? Because we talk a lot about Mark, the additions that they have, but maybe of the returning guys, and it could be a guy coming over that's already played some college hoops. Who do you think breaks out this year, Tim?
Are we talking defensively or just overall?
Just overall. I was trying to make a segue, and it kind of flopped a little.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think LeBaron's the easy choice now to watch. I mean, he's so aggressive, but I'm going to change it up and go with Mo D. I think Mo D's not a fluke. I think he has put – look at his shot. Look at his free throws. That's huge. That guy was not good at the free throw line last year. He's put the work in. He's aggressive. And that whole iron sharpens iron. This team will have better games practicing each other than they will playing opponents. That's how talented they are. And he's going to be that guy I think that's going to break out because we've went from will he be on the team? Is he going to hit the portal? How do you get him in? To how do you keep him off the court?
Yeah, he's doing the things necessary to play, and that's encouraging to see this preseason because depth is going to be insane for this team. Minutes is going to be hard to figure out. So Mo Diabate doing basically everything I think will help him. What about you, Blake? Who do you have for a breakout player?
There's so many different directions you can go here because, I thought of LeBaron Philon as a freshman who's impressed a lot. I thought of Jaren Stevenson as a guy who's gotten a lot of hype, especially in NBA circles coming back for his sophomore year. But I'm actually going to go with Grant Nelson, who I guess he broke out, so to speak, last year, but I didn't think he came into the season last season with first team all SEC preseason accolades, and he didn't necessarily live up to that. And I think a lot of that was due to the fact that he was going from a mid-major to a high-major league. He had to deal with a whole different level of physicality, and he was playing out of position, having played the 5 for much of the year. So I think now with Cliff, we kind of saw what Grant Nelson can be whenever he's able to play the 4, and Nate Oates is able to use him off of those mismatches with smaller defenders because not a lot of teams have a 6'11" 4 that's as mobile as Grant Nelson is. And we saw that in the NCAA tournament. And on top of having another year of physicality of play in the SEC under his belt, I think he could really take a step up in his play. There were a lot of games last year where he wasn't aggressive. He didn't necessarily live up to what we maybe expected. He had a couple of games in a row in SEC play where he was scoring only 4 or 5 6 points, something like that. I also think from what we've seen, his shot looks a little better. We haven't seen him in these exhibitions, but in the scrimmage at the banner reveal, I think he was 3 of 4 from 3, and it just looked better. His mechanics looked better. If he can get that 3-point percentage up into the kind of nothing crazy, just like low 30s where people have to respect his shot. He'll attack closeouts like crazy. He'll be able to finish well. Whenever he gets going downhill, he's a big guy. He's able to finish. So I think he can take a step forward with his game. And there he was preseason second team all SEC. I've seen people ranking their top 100 players in college basketball, putting him in the top 50, top 40. That would imply a breakout because he wasn't that last year. And if he takes a step forward, is able to do that, that's just another added weapon for this team. And I think he can do it.
I like that a lot. I think I'm actually kind of surprised. I know you mentioned him, but I feel like Jaren was going to be the popular pick here just because he comes back, he gets the feedback from the NBA. I like Jaren to have a bigger season. I feel like he's played with more confidence this preseason, which is huge because I think that was maybe something he was lacking. I feel like he played with that in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, he was huge against Clemson with that. But I think Jaren can have a bigger role. Another guy that I thought about too, just because you try to be prepared, you don't want to have the same answers after what we did offensive and defensive MVP-wise. I thought about Latrell Wrightsell a little bit too. He's a guy that shot almost 45% from 3. He should be healthy, missing games. Alabama was able to kind of weather the storm a little bit when it came to the early NCAA tournament. But I think Latrell is a guy that, coming back, having another year in the system, he can be really, really good for Alabama. Before we move on, I know Tim will like me to do this. Be sure you guys like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on or via podcast, give us 5 stars. That helps out a lot. We enjoy doing this. We're looking forward to a lot of hoops this season. Should be a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And with that, I think the reason that Alabama is so the preseason hype is what it is, and there's so much excitement is because of what they were able to do from an addition standpoint. And we've talked a lot about some transfers already, and it kind of feels like this one could be a slam dunk too. But what they were able to add from the transfer portal, guys, who do you think is the most significant or maybe even the most interesting addition that way? I'll start with you, Tim.
I think a guy I'm pretty high on is Chris Youngblood. From a not just, Cliff's obviously going to, bang around the rim and everything. We know what he is. Houston's going to be able to shoot it. But Chris, I've seen him in practice, and dude, he is nonstop, coast to coast, wall to wall, diving for balls in your face, rooting and hollering, slapping your butt, motivating. So he's going to be a big factor when it comes. Anytime you need energy defensively, anytime you need somebody holding you accountable. Not to mention, he's like Terrence Mead. And Mighty Mouse had a baby. He is just like a big, bowed up Terrence Mead, big athletic guy, very competitive, very, very boisterous, and seems very popular with his teammates. So maybe as much off the court as on the court, on the sideline, that he'll be able to help out, especially from a maturity standpoint.
Yeah, I think toughness, that's something that the young blood brings. He's kind of like a pit bull or a bulldog out on the court. And I think, they're going to miss him early because of the injury. But I wrote him down too because when he's healthy, heck, we have him penciled in the offseason as a projected starter coming over from USF. So I think young blood deserves a mention. What about you, Blake? Is it as easy as Cliff?
I would say Cliff. I also think on the Youngblood point, you can visibly see his leadership. And I think that's really great to even see from a player that's injured is he's in every huddle. We went to the open practice back in September, and he was on a scooter being the guy to roll onto the court and huddle guys up in between plays and everything like that. Like he is one of the biggest, most vocal leaders on this team. Cliff feels like an obvious answer, but he's going to be incredibly impactful. But I want to say Aiden Holloway is really intriguing as a transfer coming over from Auburn. He averaged like 7 points a game last year. He wasn't shooting well from the floor, field goal or 3-point percentage. I think both were in the low 30s. But we saw what he can be in that Wake Forest scrimmage. Whenever he has the green light to shoot, he's going to get better looks because I thought he kind of had a shot selection problem last season where a lot of his shots were taken off high ball screens, off the dribble, just not very good shots. And in this offense, he's going to get a ton of them. He's going to get catch and shoot looks. 4 of his 5 makes against Wake Forest run catch and shoot. Nate Oates has gone on record saying he's one of the best shooters Alabama's ever had come through Alabama. And we know the kind of guys they've had in the past. So that's huge praise in and of itself. He's really quick. He can get out in transition. I think it's going to be nice for Mark Sears to actually have a backup point guard behind him to be able to give him some breathers, some rest. I know LeBaron Philon has gotten a lot of love, but I think Holloway can have an interesting role on this team for sure. And it's also just interesting to see him come over from the in-state rival. I think that's an interesting storyline no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, the guard depth with Sears and Reitzel coming back, and then you add Holloway and Philon, it's gross. It's gross. Alabama's so deep there. And then that's, you could maybe throw Youngblood in there. I think he's more of a 3, but Houston Millett as well. But like just those 4, it's going to be tough to stop. And I'll be interested to see how they use them. I think they could play 3 of those guys a lot at the same time. But yeah, I think Youngblood, I think Holloway, I think Cliff, I think they're going to play a ton this year. And I think what they did in the portal, Nate Oates wasn't standing around like Will Smith alone in the office. He had some help to recruit once the season ended, and they certainly got to work after that Final Four and added some big pieces to this roster. And I think the freshmen too. I mean, heck, they have the number 3 class in the nation. Bringing in that quartet, I think those guys are going to contribute, a lot of them at least. So, Tim, from a freshman standpoint, who's the guy that has your interest the most heading into this season?
I think from an interest standpoint, I'm looking for Sherrell. I want to see what he can do. He's got a chance. And, the thing that's really beautiful for him is he's got Grant, he's got Cliff, he's got some guys he's playing behind. So there's not that same urgency. I mean, we've seen that with other big guys, just thrown in there and let them figure it out. Noah had to do that, who's actually coming on in the NBA. He's probably like 21 now. But I think that he's the guy, once he gets on the court, gets behind those guys, gets the easy minutes, learns. I mean, there's a lot of experience between Grant and Cliff. I mean, not just on the court, but his life experiences, how they got to Alabama. They have great stories to help him and a huge ceiling. I know. And again, you're talking about the class. The class I thought was one of the best classes in Alabama history, 2 McDonald's All-Americans. And then you add LeBaron late, almost like, no way. When that first started, we first started breaking that down, reporting that might happen. We were like, no way, not him too. So, and again, Nas Cunningham sitting over there, former number 1 player in the country, who showed brief flashes. So, incredibly talented freshman group.
What about you, Blake? Who stands out from a freshman standpoint?
I mean, they all do, to be quite honest, because there's so many guys that can contribute and that are going to be like, this team is so deep, it's ridiculous. Because I feel like we're just going down the list talking about every player. We've referenced Philon a lot, but I don't know if we've actually talked about him specifically. So I'm going to go with him. He really impressed me against Memphis in that exhibition, and just kind of overall, we heard the buzz about him in the preseason and kind of what he's been in practice, the bulldog mentality that he plays with. And you really see that on the floor. He's one of the most energetic, active players I feel like Alabama has on both ends of the floor. He guards really hard. He hustles for loose balls. I think it's really important to note that he's a guard that won the hard hat. Like, he's the one making a ton of blue collar plays, which is going to make it hard for Nate Oates to keep him off the floor. He finishes and has really incredible body control for a freshman. That's one thing I've been really impressed with. And just overall, the energy that he plays with, like, he's jawing at opponents. He's like holding up like a 3 when his teammates make it. He's just everywhere. It feels like he's always where the ball is, making a steal, making some kind of play like that. And so that's the kind of impact that you're going to have from him. And with him being a freshman, that makes it even more kind of impressive. And I think on top of that, Darion Reed, the highest ranked player in the class, he's going to be really good. I think he has a great chance to be a one and done first round pick, just with the feel that Reed has for the game. It feels like he's always making the right play in the right spot. So both of those guys are going to be really good. Sherrell's really interesting. Like, this whole freshman class is fantastic. And it's crazy that you add this number 2, number 3 freshman class on top of the returners and the transfers that you already have in.
I think for me, what stands out is, you mentioned Philon getting the hard hat after the Memphis game. Darion Reed got it after the Wake game. We see these true freshmen that come in highly touted, and they're making those blue-collar plays right away. I think that's really encouraging if you're Nate Oates and the staff. And, I'm with Tim too, though. I'm very interested to finally get a look at Aiden Sherrell. We haven't gotten to see him much because he's been held out. He should be good to go, if not for the opener, but early on in the season. That shouldn't be a lingering issue for him. But it is just so deep. And it's crazy what Nate Oates and his staff continue to be able to do on the recruiting trail. And I want to kind of turn it back over to you real quick, Tim. Just with this class and this transfer haul with Nate Oates and Preston Murphy and company, what does it say about them that they continue to kind of push the envelope from that regard?
Yeah, they're just going to go. I mean, they're going after the number one player in the country, AJ. Blake can say his last name for me. Blake, say his last
Oh,
name.
you're actually telling me to? It's
Yeah.
Devonta.
Charlie, you got to figure out I don't really do the strange names, or I really butcher them. I feel like I do the whole family a disservice. So I just bow out, let somebody else do it. But, I mean, they're chasing the number one. I mean, this guy's a generational talent, too. AJ is, I mean, it's not just he's number one, and it's crazy how great he looks compared to Cooper Flagg, who was really good last year, and another guy that, like, he was a number one plus. He was a number one player, no doubter, and then you got AJ coming in. But I don't think there's any Preston Murphy. The one thing that obviously Nate Oates loves to do is he loves to surround himself with assistants that grind and get after it. Brian was that way. Brian Hodgson, AJ Petway, Antoine Petway was that way, and then now you've got Preston Murphy, who might be both of them combined. He might be both of those, like, combined. He's certainly doing that grind and staying there with that hustle. But, I mean, putting everything together, they got, and again, you factor in the NIL, you're going to have to factor in trying to keep half your team to, still trying to keep them on campus so they don't leave. You've seen that. They've got two of the top, 75 players. One's a top 40, one's a top 75 player in the country. And they're still chasing like 4 of the top 12 guys. So, Nate Oates, the one thing I like about him the most, he's not, that's when, the football fans are a little different. When Alabama was number one, they're like, no, we thought Alabama basketball was going to be number one. They're like, no. And I'm like, no, Nate Oates loves it. He wants to be the number one. He wants to be the big favorite. He wants to be the one everybody's shooting at. And you see that recruiting, and of course, when he coaches as well.
Yeah, it's been crazy. And it's funny because, like, it does feel like Preston Murphy's kind of his right-hand man now. And then you have the offensive coordinator in Pannone, and now you bring in the defensive coordinator in Brian Adams. The staff has been put together really well, and it's just rolling. It's rolling. Blake, do you have any thoughts about Brian Adams and this new addition to the staff? I know that's kind of a curveball a little bit, but that's kind of the new guy on campus when it comes to coaches.
I think he was a great addition. I think the interesting part about last year was that the coaching roles were kind of mixed up at the start of the year. And I think you had Pannone coaching defense and Nate Oates coaching offense. And then eventually they switched that. And I think that was definitely some of the reason for some of your defensive turmoil early in the season, like in November, December, because you had a brand new staff, all 3 new guys, and they were still figuring out who was going to have what role. And once they figured that out, it was good. But it became clear that Pannone, I mean, if you look at his Twitter, he's an offensive genius. Like he's got tweets and plays from any foreign country, any basketball league, all over that place. So if you love basketball, go check out Ryan Pannone's Twitter. But they needed a defensive guy, a guy who was going to be the guy who coaches X's and O's on defense like Charlie Henry was. And that's what Brian Adams is. And I think that kind of simplicity as far as the coaching staff goes and hyper focus on the defensive end from one guy is going to pay dividends on this team.
Well, one thing we know about Nate Oates is he's not afraid to schedule anyone anywhere. And that's kind of our next point is just this schedule. It can be from a non-conference or a conference standpoint because the SEC schedule's pretty tough too. But, Tim, when you look at this schedule, what jumps out to you initially or immediately from a matchup standpoint? What's the game with the most interest for you?
I tell you, I love the way it's set up because it seems like he goes from preseason. The preseason exhibitions were probably tougher than the first 3 games. So the actual season exhibitions are set. So he's actually playing really tough opponents with strange rules and with his hand behind his back. And then you get to some games that should be, and we've ran into that before with Clemson last year, maybe they should be easier games that you're going to see. But once he gets into it, like you said, I mean, it's just a smorgasbord. And it's good because you've got, Illinois, Houston, Notre Dame, North Carolina, Creighton. You go down this list all the way to Oklahoma to get into the SEC. And it's good because these are names that the football fans recognize. So it's like, you go back, like people don't forget now, but Charlie can tell you the night on the message board, Blake, you weren't with us yet, but Bama got throttled by UConn, an unranked UConn team, I believe. And, dude, everybody was like, this ain't it, Nate. This ain't it, Nate. We got to get Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in there. And everybody else, the basketball guys were like, I don't know, man. They look pretty good to me. And then, of course, they ran off back-to-back national champions.
Yeah.
So it's good to get that schedule and get these guys because there's going to be a lot of interest from everybody on Alabama basketball. But the Alabama fans that usually turn in after the season, I think they're going to be here early. And if you want to attract attention, this is the schedule to do it.
Blake, what about you? When you look at this schedule, what jumps out to you from a game interest-wise?
They put both Auburn games on a Saturday. Finally. Like I have said this for a while, but I think right now, outside of maybe Duke and Carolina, Alabama-Auburn's the best rivalry in the sport. Just with the energy and the passion and the intensity that these games have, on top of the success that both programs have had under Oates and under Bruce Pearl, I don't think it gets any better than an Alabama-Auburn basketball game. And we've gotten the unfortunate reality that a lot of these games have been on weeknights, especially in Tuscaloosa, the past few years. This will be the first time the Auburn game will be at home on a Saturday since I think 2017. So 7 straight years of weeknight Auburn games. But Saturday in the spring is when basketball is at its biggest, and you want that kind of center stage. And now we've got both meetings being on a Saturday. I wouldn't be shocked if College Game Day picked up one of them. I think Alabama might have a better chance of doing that since their game is in February. And I think the road Auburn game to end the season is on the same day as Duke, Carolina, which they normally go to. But I'm really excited for that matchup. I'm excited for it every year. And I think this is the year that both teams are going to be at their best, as opposed to a couple of these years where Alabama's been up and Auburn's been down, or Auburn's been up and Alabama's been down. Now you've got both of them kind of at their power. It seems like it's going to be. So it's one of my favorite games just overall in the sport because of how intense it's got. Like, go back and watch an Iron Bowl of basketball from recent years, and you can just feel the intensity of those matchups. So really looking forward to both of those games this year.
I'm interested in the tournament in Vegas just because you face Houston first. But I think more so that 2-game stretch after you get back from Vegas, after Thanksgiving, you go on the road to Carolina. And this is probably not a great time to let Tim know that we've already booked a hotel for Chapel Hill. So we'll see how that goes.
Well,
but and then 10 days later, Creighton comes to town. So
yeah,
I'll say this: I do have Gold Elite status, so I can cancel 24 hours before. So that's
I want y'all there. Unless something bad happens, that would be a game.
But I think that 2-game stretch between Carolina and Creighton, it's going to be a lot of fun. You mentioned the Iron Bowl, Blake, the Iron Bowl of basketball, at least. Creighton, people hate Creighton. That's a rivalry in hoops. So I think that's going to be just a ton of fun to see them go on the road in Chapel Hill. And those games between Alabama and Carolina here of late have been a lot of fun, and they've kind of been one-sided, if we're being completely honest. But I think that's going to be a lot of fun. The season's going to be a lot of fun, if we're being honest. And then I think that's what we're going to end on is the realistic expectations for this team, because they obviously got to the Final Four for the first time this past season. And Nate Oates has been very bullish this offseason about the roster he's put together, the expectations, and what he believes they can do. He wants to get back to the Final Four. He wants to get to San Antonio, and he wants to play on that final day of the season. And so I think a lot of us kind of expect big things, but what do you think realistically is the proper way to kind of put the expectations on this team this year, Tim?
Real quick, I want to say I'm really disappointed Bama's not going to Duke this year. I just want to say, and I get Auburn and Duke will be awesome too, but I kind of envy they've got that game. Not that I have anything against North Carolina, but like you said, it's kind of been – there's even got the huge recruiting battle with Cliff and Jaron and stuff like that where you've seen it so much. Duke, I've been to Cameron. It's unbelievable. It's so small. You wouldn't even understand how they're standing. When I went in, I thought like I was in the practice gym or something. It's so small the first time. But, yeah, the expectations, I mean, it's always going to be with this team the Final Four national championship, but it's so hard to do. I mean, that's the thing about – basketball. We saw the number 1 overall team in the country, Alabama, not get past the Sweet 16 2 years ago. And then we saw a team last year that floundered at many times during the course of the season, make it to the Final Four. They didn't just make it to the Final Four. They gave Connecticut what for? They gave them the best game they had out there. So it wasn't like they just lucked in. They played the, beat number 1 seed and everything else to get there. So I think Final Four, I think Nate Oates would say the same thing. I mean, secretly I'm thinking national championship, but don't want to say it out loud. But I think Final Four, definitely get there and then just see what happens. But again, it's a long road, and I know a lot of fans are going to have to adjust to how hard of a task that is.
What about you, Blake?
I hate the term Final Four or bust in college basketball because the tournament is so hard to win 4 straight or 6 straight games in. There are great teams every year that don't make the Final Four. One that sticks out in my head, the Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett Duke team made the Elite Eight, and people look back and they think their season was a failure, but they were one of the best teams in the country all year, and they lost 1 round before the Final Four. I think making the Sweet 16 is a huge accomplishment. Winning those first
Absolutely.
2 games that you are supposed to win, usually if you're a top 3, 4 seed. But then really anything past that, who knows what can happen? Because if you get to the Sweet 16 and you're a 1 seed, you could be playing a hot 4 seed like Alabama was. You could get to the Elite Eight, and if you lose in the Elite Eight, you're losing to a 2 seed. You're losing to a top 8 team in the country. So I don't think – I think they can make the Final Four. I think they can win the national championship. They have the talent. I think it's hard for me to say Final Four bust because of how unpredictable the tournament is. But I think competing for an SEC championship is absolutely the expectation. I think they should be right there, top 1 or 2, and competing for an SEC regular season title. I think that's as far as I can go with my expectations because the postseason is so unpredictable. But if they're not there in 1 game, 2 games, or winning the SEC regular season title, getting a 1, 2, or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, I think that would be disappointing. But I think those are all things that they can do and that they definitely have the potential to do. And I think they can win the national championship. I think that's their ceiling.
Yeah, I feel like the SEC regular season title is a good place to start. I think they can make some noise in Nashville too. But you're right. I mean, Final Four is tough. I mean, hell, Alabama did it for the first time this past season. And they've had some very good basketball teams. The tradition is rich from a Crimson Tide basketball standpoint. I think second weekend, I think realistic expectations, to get to that second weekend of the tournament and have a chance, I think that would be a successful season. I know there's a lot of people that are going to think if they don't make it back to the Final Four of this roster, it's a disappointment. And that's just, it's unfair. I think they can. I think Nate Oates believes they can. I think these players believe they can. That's why guys like Mark Sears and others came back. But it's tough. I think getting to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight again, give yourself a chance. I think that's very realistic. But fellas, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. We're going to keep up with it here, and of course on BamaOnLine.com on the BOL Roundtable. We'll have plenty of hoops coverage because young Blake Byler loves some hoop coverage. We're going to the Arkansas State game on Friday night before driving up to Baton Rouge on Saturday morning. That's how times have changed around these parts. So it'll be a lot of fun. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, guys. We enjoy doing this. We enjoy you tuning in. Give us 5 stars if you're listening on podcasts, and we'll see you guys next week because we won't do anything this weekend. No football game. What a joy. We'll see you guys on Tuesday for the BOL Big Show.